In a textile warehouse at night, a place where faceless mannequins seem like silent observers and the shadows dance unsettlingly, stretching with the irregular flicker of a distant service light, Esther, an employee, is finishing her shift. She packs her things in a small break room. It is then that she notices, through the open door, a light flickering intermittently at the back of the vast warehouse. It is not a quick flicker. It is slow, deliberate, almost organic. Her curiosity, tinged with primordial apprehension, leads her to investigate. As she approaches, the main row of lights suddenly goes out, plunging her into a darkness so dense it seems to have weight. When the light comes back on with a hum, a dark, contorted silhouette of a woman with long, unkempt hair is visible in the distance, perfectly framed by the distant light. The figure is thin, almost skeletal, in an unnatural posture, like a broken puppet. Esther freezes, her brain struggling to process the image, trying to fit it into a rational category. She blinks, hoping the image will correct itself, and in the next instant, the light goes out again. Then a sound is heard that chills the blood, a dry, quick dragging of long nails scraping the concrete. The light returns and the figure has disappeared. A momentary relief passes through her, but the dread remains stronger, because the absence of the figure is now more frightening than its presence. She knows she is not alone. She calls for Paul, her boss, her voice a trembling thread. Paul, in the comfort of his well-lit office, is on a video call with his young son, Martin. The conversation is light, a forced attempt at normality over an undercurrent of anxiety. Paul tries to make Martin smile, but the worry about his wife, Sophie, is palpable on his tired face. He mentions, almost in a whisper, that Sophie has been talking to herself again, with an imaginary friend named Diana, a name he pronounces with a mix of irritation and fear. Martin, on the other end of the line in his room, has an expression of familiar and deep fear. He does not need explanations. He lives with that friend. Esther bursts abruptly into Paul's office, her face pale and her eyes wide. She tries to explain what she saw, her voice a frightened, incoherent whisper. She speaks of a woman, of claws, of the darkness. Paul, a man of logic, though disturbed by the mention of a figure in the dark, tries to calm her, attributing the vision to fatigue and shadows. He tells her to go home and rest, yet his voice attempts to be reassuring, but his own unease pulls him to check on the woman's tale. With a sigh of resignation, he ends the call with his son, promising to call later, and goes to investigate. Upon arriving at the spot, Paul feels a chill. He hears a noise coming from the warehouse, a soft sound of something falling. Suddenly, the last row of lights, the one that illuminates the area where Esther saw the figure, does not go out. A scratching sound, the same sound Esther heard, comes from the back of the dark warehouse. It is closer now. Paul, with his heart pounding uncontrollably, approaches cautiously. In the darkness, beyond the reach of the last light, he can make out the same silhouette. It is tall, thin, and distorted. He backs away slowly, and fear paralyzes him. Frightened, Paul runs to take shelter in his office but trips and falls. He gets up and notices that the shadowy silhouette is in front of him, and in terror, he quickly runs to the office, where inside he arms himself with a wooden bat. The entire warehouse is in darkness, but it does not take long for the room to have its lights out as well. In the blink of an eye, with a violent snap, something pulls Paul into the darkness, and only a guttural scream and a muffled groan from Paul are heard. When the lights are turned on, we see Paul's fallen body dead in the middle of the corridor. The scene shifts to Sophie's house, a large, once beautiful home. Martin is sitting on his bed, fully awake, his body tense. His eyes are fixed on the bedroom door, a fragile barrier against the night. He hears his mother talking in the next room. He knows she is speaking with Diana. Sophie's words are fragmented, a mixture of affection and pleading, trying to soothe Diana, telling her that Martin will eventually accept her. The sound of scratches on the bedroom door makes him retreat to the bed and hide under the covers. Diana's nails scrape the wood, an intimate and threatening sound. He knows she is outside, in the dark hallway, waiting. The next morning at school, Martin's sleep deprivation is obvious. His teacher, concerned, tries to wake him, but he is deeply asleep. A social services worker, Emma, is called to talk to Martin. He sits in front of her, reluctant to speak, knowing adults rarely believe in monsters. But Emma's kindness breaks down his defenses, and he admits he cannot sleep because his mother talks to someone in the dark. He does not mention the name Diana, for fear of sounding crazy. Emma, worried, decides to contact his older half-sister, Rebecca. Rebecca is the personification of forced independence. with an attitude of not caring. But beneath that facade, there is a deep vulnerability and trauma she tries to keep buried. Getting involved with her family means revisiting the pain she left behind. But concern for her brother outweighs her reluctance. She is with her boyfriend, Brett, a good-hearted musician whose rough appearance belies a gentle nature. She goes to school to pick up Martin, and the relief on his face when he sees her is heartbreaking. As they walk, Martin tells Rebecca that Sophie has been talking to someone called Diana. Rebecca asks more about Diana, but Martin says he only hears Sophie conversing with her. Rebecca tells Martin that Diana is not real, that she is only created and imagined by his mother. A little later, Sophie receives the children at home. When Sophie asks why Martin is home from school so early, he replies that Rebecca will explain. Unbeknownst to Rebecca, Martin goes upstairs to pack his things. Rebecca talks with Sophie and discovers that Sophie is not taking her antidepressants, which results in an argument. When Rebecca says she will take Martin to her house for a few nights, Martin comes down with his suitcase ready to go. Sophie starts to cry and begs Rebecca to let Martin stay, but Rebecca refuses and takes Martin to her home. Later that day, Rebecca and Martin arrive at her apartment and she shows him the room. Despite the dark posters on the walls, Martin unpacks and tests whether the flashlight works. When Rebecca leaves the room, Brett seems concerned that Rebecca took Martin against his mother's will. He wonders if she is doing it for Martin or for herself to hurt their mother. Irritated, Rebecca asks Brett to leave. That night, during dinner, Rebecca makes sandwiches for both. While Martin eats, she fixes his hair. Then suddenly Martin asks Rebecca whether, if their mother is crazy, it means they are crazy too, to which she assures him they are not crazy. In the middle of the night, Rebecca notices Martin has disappeared from the bed. Hearing a scratching, Rebecca gets up assuming it is Martin. However, she investigates the source of the noise and notices a hunched figure scratching the floor near the bedroom door. The outside light flickers, and Rebecca sees the creature appearing and disappearing. The figure notices Rebecca looking at it and appears right in front of her. Fortunately, the emergency light comes on, and it vanishes. Rebecca runs to the switch and turns on the light, seeing nothing afterward. She then searches for Martin and finds him sleeping in the bathtub with a flashlight on. The next day, Emma knocks on Rebecca's door, notifying her about taking Martin against his mother's wishes. Rebecca says her mother is not in good mental condition, but Emma informs her she needs to file a case against the mother before taking Martin to the apartment. Emma then returns Martin to Sophie. Rebecca is alone again in the apartment. Thinking about what to do next for Martin, she notices a scribble on the floor that reads, "Diana," with a drawing beside it. She then remembers an incident from her youth. When she was about Martin's age, she heard a bang and scratches in the dark while drawing her family. As she approached the dark closet, the noises stopped. When she turned on the light, her drawing had fallen to the floor. She picked up the paper and noticed someone had removed her father from the drawing and inserted herself, naming herself Diana. Later that day, Rebecca and Brett break into Sophie's house to gather information about Diana. She takes a hidden key and they enter. Rebecca immediately goes upstairs and finds a box with information about Sophie and her prior hospitalization in a psychiatric hospital as a child. Rebecca discovers Sophie met there a girl named Diana, who had a rare skin disease and could not have contact with light. Doctors used many lights to perform an experimental procedure on Diana, which resulted in her death. Rebecca visits her old room and finds the old drawing. Then suddenly the door slams shut behind her. She bangs on the door hoping Brett will hear, but a force throws her onto the ceiling and strangles her with her necklace. Brett hears Rebecca's screams and manages to open the door. The hallway light makes Diana disappear and Rebecca falls to the floor. Rebecca then grabs the box with Diana's information and flees through the back door after Brett tells her Sophie is returning home with Martin. A little later, Sophie and Martin spend time together watching an old movie. Martin is happy to finally connect with his mother. While eating popcorn, Martin and Sophie watch the movie and casually talk about how they are coping after Paul's death. Sophie tells Martin that Rebecca only pretends to be strong since she abandoned her when things got complicated. But Martin assures that he will not leave his mother. He also says she needs to be strong and sometimes face her fears. Later, Sophie pauses the movie and tells Martin she will be right back. Suddenly, she gets up and turns off the lights. Martin is frightened, and Sophie tries to soothe him by telling him about her friendship with Diana. She convinces him that Diana is her friend and can only stay if all the lights are off. Martin begins to hyperventilate and goes crazy when Diana appears beside him. He tries to turn on the lights, but when Diana is about to stop him, Sophie intervenes, and Diana hits Sophie in the face, knocking her to the floor. Martin takes the opportunity to turn on the lamp and run to the front door to flee. Martin arrives at Rebecca's apartment, saying Sophie is getting worse. Brett then goes to the store to buy food, allowing Martin to speak alone with Rebecca. Martin explains what happened and says Diana exists. Rebecca understands he is telling the truth and tells what she discovered about Diana. Rebecca says the entity enters Sophie's mind and convinces her it is a friend. Rebecca reveals that Diana only appears when Sophie is at her worst, allowing her to control her. She also reports that Diana died during an experiment, and only Sophie is her connection to this world. Rebecca plans to keep her mother constantly in better spirits, hoping to break the link with Diana. Still, Martin says Diana will not allow it because Paul already tried and failed. Suddenly, someone knocks on the door. Rebecca goes to answer thinking it is Brett, but there is no one. There are scratches on the walls and in the bedroom closet, and when she opens the closet door, it appears empty. However, Diana grabs Martin's leg and pulls him under Rebecca's bed, but Rebecca drags Martin back. That night, Rebecca and Martin return to Sophie's house with Brett. Sophie ignores Rebecca's attempts to persuade her that Diana is dead, but that her spirit is trying to kill them. Still, Sophie dismisses the idea and goes upstairs to the bedroom. Meanwhile, Rebecca persuades Martin to sleep at her house, but Martin refuses to leave his mother. Rebecca then decides the three will spend the night. Brett will rest on the sofa while Rebecca will share Martin's room. Rebecca enters Sophie's bedroom to inform her she will stay overnight. Sophie opens the door as she steps away from the bedroom entrance, expressing gratitude to Rebecca for allowing her to spend the night with her. While hugging Rebecca, Sophie takes her hand and slips a paper before turning back as if something tugs at her clothes. Rebecca, reading the note, sees it as a plea for help. Rebecca runs to find Sophie's medication, but they are all expired. She then joins Martin in bed. Later that night, a total blackout occurs. Brett investigates outside with a flashlight, while Rebecca searches for the fuse box in the basement. When Martin wakes, he discovers Rebecca has vanished. He grabs a candle and walks down the hallway. Diana appears behind him. Trying to escape, Martin trips while holding the candle, and suddenly Diana begins to drag him, but Martin turns and shines the candle in her face, causing her to flee for a moment. Martin runs down the stairs to the basement, where he finds Rebecca. At the top of the stairs, Diana appears and slams the basement door, trapping them inside. At the same time, Brett discovers Rebecca and Martin are trapped in the basement and tries to open it. He turns and sees Diana in the kitchen, in the corridor. She begins to approach him. However, he directs the flashlight beam at her. She disappears for a moment before reappearing beside him, taking the flashlight from his hand and knocking him to the floor. Diana carefully approaches, but he grabs his phone and turns on its light toward her. With the phone in his hand, he keeps her at bay. The creature emerges from the darkness and knocks him down. Brett gets up immediately and runs away. Diana grabs him as he passes in front of his car. She lifts him above her head, but Brett grabs the car keys and presses the alarm button before she can kill him. The car headlights turn on, dispersing Diana and throwing Brett to the ground. He gets in the car and drives away to get help. Upon realizing Martin and Rebecca are in danger, Sophie understands Diana is not her friend. She calls to Diana, saying she cannot survive because Diana latched onto Sophie as a spirit. Sophie is about to take her medication when Diana enters and strikes her across the room. Martin and Rebecca remain confined in the basement. Rebecca rummages through a box, using scraps of paper to keep the boiler fire burning, and Martin finds an old ultraviolet light and brings it to Rebecca. Using the ultraviolet light, Rebecca examines the basement and discovers writings scattered across the walls. Diana suddenly appears, and Rebecca realizes the ultraviolet light cannot hurt Diana. Suddenly, as she tries to pick up a shovel, Diana grabs her hand while crawling between the furniture. Fortunately, Martin saves her by shining a light on Diana's hand. They run toward the basement door and continue banging, calling for their mother's help. Meanwhile, 2 police officers escort Brett into the house. As the 2 officers enter, he remains outside in his car. However, they manage to rescue Rebecca and Martin from the basement, but not before Diana murders one of the officers while she was inspecting the kitchen. Rebecca tries to warn the other officer that they will need to use a flashlight to survive, but the officer does not listen to her. Still, he fires at Diana, but she vanishes because of the glare from the gun. Diana manages to gain the advantage and ends up killing the officer. At the same time, when Rebecca and Martin can now leave the house, he refuses because he does not want to leave Sophie behind. When Brett arrives at the door, Rebecca asks him to look after Martin while she goes to fetch Sophie. Rebecca reaches the second floor with the black light and the flashlight. Diana slowly approaches from behind, but Rebecca burns Diana's hand using the flashlight. Angered, Diana grabs Rebecca and throws her from the second floor balcony, where she falls to the ground floor, but relatively unharmed. Diana descends the stairs and is about to kill Rebecca when Sophie suddenly appears pointing a gun. Sophie warns Diana that if she harms any of her children, she will be held accountable. When Diana is about to stop, Sophie puts the gun to her own head and pulls the trigger. As she dies, Diana disintegrates into dust. Rebecca is overwhelmed with emotion as she witnesses how her mother saved them by sacrificing herself. She crawls to her mother and holds her lifeless body in her arms. Later, Rebecca accompanies Martin and Brett in the ambulance. Rebecca thanks Brett for having come back to save them, while Martin also admires him for having done the same. The three console each other in the ambulance as the police continue to arrive, leaving the police lights illuminating the scene.